Hello, I'm Gregory Arden II. This is the Greenhorn Rebellion Show, and today I am here with Andy Fugate. He's state representative for District 94, which is the Del City area, and he is also the minority floor leader for the Democrats in the Oklahoma State Legislature. How are you doing today?
I'm having a wonderful morning. I appreciate the invitation to come join you on your show. It's always a pleasure to visit with you about politics.
Yeah, um, it's always good to talk with you because you have so much knowledge about what's going on at the Capitol and the different wild stuff that happens up there.
It's been a pretty crazy week.
So,
Whoa, 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 whoa. Stop what you're doing. Okay. If you like this video and you like the other content on my channel, please hit the like button on this video. Also, go hit subscribe, like right now. And also, when you hit subscribe, click the bell so you can get notifications whenever I put out a new video. So, thanks. Alright, enjoy the rest of the video.
first thing I want to talk with you about is the managed care system that uh, was passed at the legislature this year. What does that entail, and how does that change things for people who use Medicaid sooner care here in Oklahoma?
So I'm going to be upfront with you right at the start and tell you I'm by no means an expert in this particular area. It is a place where I've leaned across the aisle to Representative Marcus McIntyre, who in the House side has really led the charge in doing all of this. Um, if you'll remember, people of Oklahoma passed Medicaid expansion. Um, after a decade of the legislature continuing to say no and turning away literally billions of federal dollars, the people finally said enough is enough. We're tired of our rural hospitals closing and being ranked dead last or close every year in health outcomes in the state of Oklahoma because people we're a poverty state. We're bottom 10 in poverty. And a lot of those folks, they're working poor, but they don't have access to health care. Short of going to the emergency room and trying to get indigent care and getting calls from bill collectors, et cetera, or going through bankruptcy, whatever it is, because they don't have insurance. And so we passed that via state question. The governor turned around then and tried to implement managed care for this population. And managed care basically says instead of just additional fee for service where I'm going to go to a doctor when I think I'm sick and I need, need him to take a look at my knee or I'm coughing or whatever it is. And under managed care, you're assigned and you have the opportunity to have input into who you pick, but you have somebody who is helping guide your medical care. And where that really is important is with chronic illnesses. So diabetes is prevalent in the state of Oklahoma, and so there'll be somebody involved in your case who's working with you to make sure that you're taking medicine, whenever you need to be taking insulin, for instance, so that you don't wind up extremely sick. So you're managing the illness that you have. Or if you are, you get injured in a car accident and you're trying to work through all of the various surgeries or whatever else that's associated with, the crash, you have a person who can help navigate through the medical system to make sure that you're getting x-rays that you need to get or an MRI or, those kinds of things. And so in the ideal world, it's a very positive thing. Um, the reality is, even though the governor proposed, and the governor's proposal basically had four outside entities, private entities that were going to manage this whole process, and they were effectively out-of-state corporations who went and created these little stand-up corporations inside the state of Oklahoma so they could say, oh, we're doing business in Oklahoma, so we qualify to be part of this. The reality is all the work was actually being done out, or would have been done outside of the state. And so I'll cut to the chase here. You know, with the managed care process, the idea is that you have a set pool of money out there, right? And the managed care folks are trying to keep people healthy so they make money off of that pool of money, right? Because the less people need doctors, the more money is available for them to have. The governor's plan had a 15% cut off the top that was just given to those people for doing that, and that's goofy. The state's only paying 4% right now to do something very similar with populations, the age blinded, disabled. So we can do it at 4%. Why pay the 15% the governor wanted? But that's neither here nor there. The traditional mechanism, which is fee for service, I go to the doctor and they, give me 10 different tests, and I have to pay to visit the doctor, and et cetera. Each one of those is an individual item that gets billed, and the more billings, the more things they can bill for, the more money they make effectively, right? So that's kind of the difference between the two. In both cases, in the ideal world, they're actually trying to make you healthier, but for a variety of reasons, on the fee-for-service side of things, they're trying to cover themselves, because if they overlook something or choose to not do a particular test and later that becomes a thing that kills you, then your family is going to sue them for malpractice, right? So they're not just trying to keep you healthy, but they're trying to CYA. And on the other side of things, ultimately they're making money by you not getting services. So the fewer services they can get for you, and just enough to keep you healthy, then the better off they are. And so if we're going down this managed care path, I think one of the things we really need to be doing as a state is measuring the correct outcome. And the correct outcome should not be savings. It should not be numbers of people who have access to service, but it should be overall healthy outcomes of those people who are part of that process. So if we can reduce diabetes, for instance, if we can reduce chronic pain and the use of having to go see doctors because somebody's actually getting the appropriate treatments, then we've won as a state. But who knows if that'll happen. What helped us get this passed this time around, when previously the legislature has kind of been in full no mode, is because this time around the doctors and hospitals got on board. Hospitals and doctors were very concerned about having this third party, the governor's handpicked folks involved in this, because they knew they would be limiting what doctors could do for people, right? And they're in the world, their primary concern is making sure that they keep people healthy, or fixing whatever it is, as best they can. In the plan that was finally passed, they allowed doctors and hospitals to be part of that provider process, so they can set up their own managed care processes, so they get part of the extra gravy train. So it wasn't something in the end that I was in favor of. The fact that you sweetened the pot for doctors and hospitals and said, hey, you guys can be part of this deal, wasn't good enough for me. So I, in the end, voted no against it. Although I understand what they're trying to do, I just believe that the state was doing it for significantly less than what we're going to be allowing others to do it.
So, and this specific managed care system that was passed, it is for the people who would be able to be on Medicaid now that the Medicaid expansion was passed, right? Not for the people who were already on it beforehand.
So short answer is yes, it's for the expansion population. The
Okay.
longer answer is we have moved some people who are already receiving Medicaid into that expansion population. Why? Because under traditional Medicaid, those people, we get a reimbursement of $2 for every dollar that we spend, right, from the federal government. The Medicaid expansion reimbursement is $9 federal for every state dollar that we put in. So, we get a lot more dollars just by shifting people where we could. Um, it's not a huge number of people, but it is a sizable population. It's not insignificant. So.
Yeah. So therefore, um, so nothing changes mostly for the people who are already on it prior to expansion, just for the people who were able to apply afterwards. So does that mean in the future the legislature could change it to where they can add more people to the managed care system?
Yes, assuming it proves out, and assuming I was wrong, and I'm happy to be wrong in this particular case, we could certainly expand it to additional populations. I mean, my initial reaction was if managed care is such a great thing, why isn't the very first population to do managed care the legislature?
Yeah.
I mean, the vast majority of us are getting our health insurance from the state. Um, Make us that population that tests it out and see whether or not it works.
Yeah, because so for the people that are on the expansion, what it is for them, so how it works for them versus the other non-managed care patients. It's kind of like a private system in a way. So their doctor won't be able to suggest certain things for them or be able to allow them to have certain things or do certain things simply because it wouldn't be profitable or the money's not going to be there for them because it's not technically part of a plan, right? Something like that.
Yeah, and I'm going to be a little more charitable and describe it in the ideal situation where you have a doctor and a patient and your managed care coordinator who is helping to narrow down what ought to be done or expand even what ought to be done to address the issue. Hopefully, they have medical knowledge in addition to the doctor's knowledge. Most folks, when they go to the hospital, go to see a doctor, probably the closest they've done is do a little quick Googling.
Yeah.
Right. I happen to be very blessed because my wife should have been a doctor. She has a great depth of medical knowledge, and it's always entertaining when we go to the doctor. She's having these conversations with the doctor that are just way up there, talking about specific drugs and treatments, and um, that's just kind of who she is. But I'm not that guy, and so I go in, and the doctor says, "Oh, we need to do these." And okay, that sounds good. And my wife says, "Well, wait a minute. Before we do that, doesn't this have this potential outcome on this?" And the doctor says, "Well, that's true. How about if we do this?" And so in the ideal world, I think of it as having my wife for everybody.
Yeah. that's that's something. But in this instance, your wife would be working on behalf of who? The state or the private company?
That's the kicker, the private company. And so imagine instead of my wife, you have an accountant who comes in and says, I don't know, this one is 10% cheaper. Why don't we
Is
do
that
that one?
or it's not your wife, it's your in-law who you don't have a good relationship with or something. Making a joke, I'm not saying
Right,
that's
right.
you, but like it's someone who's not necessarily there to work in your favor of your health, but someone who is going to consider that, but the primary part is making sure the private entity that gets to keep as much money as they can and not spend as much money as they can.
Exactly. Say they're a stockholder in the company. Well, their best interest then is to, as much as possible, save every single penny they can because it
Yeah.
makes them more money. So yeah, that's the
which
challenge.
is why the overhead is projected to be somewhere upwards of 15% versus what our current uh, sooner care Medicaid system is. I want to say 2% or 4%, something like that. 2 to
4%, yeah.
4%. Yeah.
Administrative burden, and I got this number directly from the Healthcare Authority when they did their budget presentation 2 years ago, is just under 4% to administer the system the way they do it today, including those places where we were already doing some form of managed care.
Okay. Interesting. All right. Well, that answers some questions, or that answers a lot of what I was thinking about. So, all right. So I remember last time you were on, you said that you would propose some bills that had to do with some type of electoral reform. So, like, I think what was one of your bills? One of your bills was that if a person ran unopposed in the general, that they would have to still be on the ballot, but have citizens vote on retention essentially. And then if they vote no to retain them, then there would have to be a special election.
Mm-hmm.
So, and this was partially in response to the fact, I don't remember if you mentioned this, but this is part of the reason why we have this problem where a lot of incumbents run unopposed is because of where the districts are. They're either 70-80% red or 70-80% blue. Therefore, it's all decided in the primary who gets to be the winner. And so have so here in where I live in Potawatomi County, and I believe this is true for, I would say, most people who are Democrats in the state of Oklahoma, if you're a registered Democrat. In June 26th, it was 26th, right? Whenever we had our primary,
Mm-hmm.
I had three things on my ballot. It was U.S. Senate, governor's race, and then district judge, which district judge is nonpartisan. Everyone in my district got to vote on that. But I had three things on my ballot. But the Republicans had the entire Declaration of Independence plus the Constitution plus, you know, uh, what's the one that the Magna Carta.
Magna Carta.
Yes, yeah,
Yeah.
they had all types of stuff, and
Their ballot was almost as long as the Oklahoma Constitution.
exactly right. Like it was so many different races, and I knew that because not just because I looked at the filings, but because I had friends of mine who they registered as Republicans so they could vote in, state superintendent's race or something like that. And they asked me to, like, hey, here's my sample ballot. Tell me who to vote for all of these other races. I don't know who all these people are. And, I had to do a lot of research on all these different candidates and whatnot. But I also realized in some of these races, there is no general election, or to the extent that there is a general election, it's like, I think in the attorney general's race, it's I think there's a libertarian.
There's a libertarian running.
Yeah. So, but when it came to my DA's race, because this is the scarier one, district 23. Yes. We had 3 Republicans file to run. One of the Republicans ended up getting 58% of the vote, and won outright. And then 5 days later, he passed away. And that means that because he was the district attorney elect, Kevin Stitt, or whoever the governor is, gets to appoint his replacement until there's supposedly a special election. But my point in bringing all this up is I didn't get to have a say in that race. I didn't have a say in probably a number of other races. I can't think of off the top of my head because I think most
sheriff.
of the races. Sure, I didn't. There was sheriff wasn't up this year.
Yeah,
for
that's
me.
pretty typical.
But that's another. But in 2020, it was the same way where there was I think 3 Republicans that ran in my county. There's no Democrats that ran, so it was all decided in the general. Same thing or in the primary. Same thing with I want to say in my state Senate district in 2020, there was 4 Republicans, and then there was a Libertarian candidate. But for the most part, it was decided in the primary, and I personally had a preference for who won that Republican primary, and that person didn't win. And I, as a Democrat, I could have switched over to vote for, but I couldn't because the filing date is after the day to switch.
Yeah, they've got a blackout.
So my point is open primaries in our state. Independents can vote in Democratic primaries. That's the state party's choice, but Republican primaries are completely closed. What can we do to open that up? And also, do you think something like that would even pass in the legislature?
Well, I'm going to give it a shot because I have an idea. And so I'll describe that idea, and then if we could go back a little bit to a couple of the 2 previous bills I filed. But this time around, the bill I'm going to request says that, okay, let's talk about the reality of what a primary is, right? Primary is an election that replaces the way parties used to choose their candidates. Parties used to use a caucus process, right? And there are some states, Iowa, for instance, that still uses the caucus mechanism where people get together at their local level and they decide who they're going to support and everything else, right? But when you look at it in the big picture, it is nothing more than a party process. And I don't believe that the people of Oklahoma should be paying for a party to choose their candidates. If you want to have your party go do however you want to choose your candidates, right? That's your business. But if it's not a free, fair, and open election, you pay for it because it's a party process, not a people process. So I'm proposing language that would require political party or political primaries that are closed primaries to be held on a separate date, not on the dates of state elections, and that the parties pay for them. So it's your choice as a party. You want to keep it closed because you want to maintain the wholesomeness and purity or whatever it is, fine. You pay for it. And you can't have it on the same day as a regular state election.
So therefore, in this instance, the Democrats would still be able to have theirs on a state election day because they have theirs partially open to independents, and then Republicans wouldn't because theirs is closed, right?
So I haven't nailed down that piece of it. How open does it have to be is your question, and I think it's a great question. Maybe you have some input on that.
So for me, I would like to see it be one of 2 ways. So in a state like Vermont, they have it to where, and other states are like this too, but in a state like Vermont, when you register to vote, you don't register as a party. But when it's a primary day, you pick which party ballot line you want to vote in the primary of. And then other states like in Georgia, you can register as a party, but when it's primary day, you can still choose which party primary ballot line you want to vote in. So I feel like if Oklahoma would have to kind of do a Georgia thing where you can vote in a certain party primary ballot line, even though you're a member of a certain party. Because for me personally, if I had the choice on June 26th to vote in a Republican primary or the Democratic primary, seeing I only have two Democratic primaries to vote in, and I feel like I have an idea of either where those are going to end up, or don't feel as strongly about voting in those as I do the other ones where I know there's no general election, or to accept that there is going to be a general election. I know that because of the R by that person's name, they're going to automatically win, regardless of who wins the primary. I would rather vote in that primary, on that ballot line, simply because of that. Another thing that I want to see, which I feel like might be a little bit more difficult to do, is, and I don't know if any states do this, but just have each different primary race be on a different ballot to let people pick and choose which one they would rather vote in. So instead of, so even though I'm a registered Democrat, if I wanted to instead, so for Democrats, there was a governor's race, and then for Democrats and Republicans, was governor's primaries, and then there was a U.S. Senate primary for that same seat to replace Langford. There was a primary technically on the Republican side, but instead of me, instead of
Primary.
me, yes. And so instead of me deciding to vote in the Democratic race for governor, I could vote in the Republican race if I wanted to, but not the Democratic race, because you can only vote. So therefore, it's still one vote for, one race, and then, but instead it's in that primary versus the other primary, and then I can choose to vote in, the primary for this race on that party, and we can just have separate ballots for those races, even though I feel like on some level that would be a lot more money because you'd have a lot more paper, and
Don't do it on
but
separate ballots.
So
here's the chunk that is governor. Here's this side over here for Republican.
Oh yes, I see what you mean. So just have the same ballots, but have everyone only choose one, and then if they end up choosing two in the same thing, it just nullifies that vote entirely.
Yep.
Yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, because right now we have it set up to where if you mark, like if it's a ballot question or whatever, and you mark both yes and no, it just throws out that whole answer for that specific one, but not the other options on the thing. Yeah, that would work too. I would rather it be that way, because then if I want to choose to vote in, specific primary versus another, I can just do that and not have to worry about it. But yeah, but that's kind of what I think of when it comes to that. I would rather just be completely open across the board.
I think your idea is a great idea, and kudos to you for kind of thinking about this. The vast majority of people can't see anything different, and so they scratch their head. While I think ultimately, I think something like ranked choice voting would make a lot of sense. It's just such an uphill battle to get people to understand different. And so every piece of legislation that I've proposed as far as elections, whether it's a recall process or, the last session's retention ballot, have been just trying to get people to understand and think differently about elections. Ultimately, maybe we'll reach a point where we do ranked choice voting the way Alaska is doing ranked choice, for instance. So kudos to you, my friend. Now, kind of coming back to the couple of proposals I've had over the last two sessions, I want to give you a couple of statistics. There are 125 legislative seats up for election this year. Okay? Of those, 87 will not make it to the general election. So 2/3 of those, the people in that district, all the people will not get a choice in who represents them. So we live in a representative democracy, which means that the people choose their representatives. And in my district, because I had no challenger, there's one person out of 40,000 people who decided who's going to be our next representative, and that's me. And I have that conversation when I'm knocking doors and talking to people, especially people, are you a Democrat or Republican? Well, I'm a Democrat. Oh, I hate Democrats. I would never vote for a Democrat. Well, you won't get a
Well,
chance to vote for this one.
or
I
against
had a
them.
bill
Yeah.
that would have changed it. And believe it or not, you get people looking at you it's like, you wanted to stand for election? I said, I'm out here talking to people because I believe you deserve the right to know who I am and to make a choice. So even though I'm not on the ballot, I represent you. I want you to know who I am. And I think it's important that you get a choice in who represents you. And the eyes kind of open up. People just don't understand. I hear my Republican colleagues talk about, the United States is a republic. Well, so we
Not
have
a
a republic.
democracy.
Well, we have a
Yeah.
Republican form of government, but it is ultimately a representative democracy because republics can be made up of people who are not elected, who are, an oligarchy, for instance, and they're representatives of areas, for instance, by virtue of their family, right? And that could be a republic too, but it's a damn lousy one, and it's not what the Constitution created. So that's why when I have this argument with my colleagues, it's a republic. Well, yes, but it's a representative democracy
Yeah.
because the people are supposed to be choosing.
Some people could say it's a democratic republic,
Well,
or yeah,
I tend to
because
shy away from that terminology because
mhm,
people conflate that in their minds with, the
the
people's,
parties, or
well,
yeah.
no, not even the parties. It's the use of democratic republics, the Democratic Republic of Congo, which is
Oh
not,
yeah, yeah.
you know, uh, People's Republic of.
Of yeah, yeah, yeah. Because I've seen people bring that argument up a lot, especially when I was like in high school. It's like so weird to me. I'm like, do you not understand how like the House of Representatives is made up? We it's made up of the number of people in each state, or the total population of the country. Then it gets divided up by the number of people in each state. Like that's how that works. Same thing with the Electoral College. It's based on the number of U.S. senators plus the number of U.S. House seats. And that's hypothetically how our state house and state senate districts are set up. It's by the number of people in each district, so it's supposed to be representative of the people in those districts plus their votes. So I never understood how people tried to separate those two things, as if the democracy part is a secondary, or uh, something that doesn't factor into the whole process. But yeah, but but yeah, that's kind of been my big beef lately, is the lack of open primaries thing, and I've always kind of had a problem with it, even whenever I was younger and just started voting, because if we but my argument back then wasn't based on and by back then I mean 2016, whenever I first turned 18. My argument wasn't so much about my personal grievance of only having two things to vote on in a primary. It was because in the country, most at the time, I think it was like 40 something percent of people had identified as independents in the country, not so much in the state of Oklahoma. But even in Oklahoma, that number's tripled since 2016 or something like that. I want to say was 15% of Oklahomans identify as independents now. And so those people still should have the right to be able to participate in primaries, just like I can as a registered Democrat and whatnot. So that used to be my main argument. I still believe in that because, I mean, democracy's sake, and they're pay. Oh, and then that goes back to your part. They're paying for it. How come they can't participate in it?
Exactly. They're paying
Yeah.
for it. They ought to be allowed to participate. And, I understand why a party wants to have a process to decide who their preferred candidate is. I get that. And so if you want to do that, fine. You guys pay for it. It's not a people process. You could even take it a step further, and this was from former Congressman Mickey Edwards, who was the congressman for CD5 when I was much, much younger, and first Republican in a long time that was,
Yeah.
elected. Um, and he's no longer Republican, by the way.
Yeah. I know.
Uh,
Yeah. I
yeah.
remember hearing what he had to say about uh, Trump and whatnot. And he voted for Obama too.
Well, where the Republican Party has
Yeah.
gone, and his observation about primaries is that we allow the parties to eliminate candidates. Why? These people filed for office. Why should a party be allowed to remove them from the final ballot? The primary process is only about determining who their preferred candidate is that they will support with all of their resources and dollars, et cetera. But we should not allow them to eliminate all the other candidates. Now, I don't know about you. I'm not sure I want to look at the 13 Republican candidates for, Jim Inhofe.
CD2 or
Well,
CD2. That's
yeah.
even worse.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, you're
Because
right.
because what is it? The two top vote getters in that race, what was it, 14 and 13% or something? Yeah.
Yeah. Avery Fricks and Josh Burkeen. And which was just bizarre to me. Nobody knows anybody down there. Uh, so I do want to backtrack a little bit more too and talk about an actual situation in this particular last June 26th election. There were a number of Republican colleagues of mine who were targeted with out-of-state dollars because of their support for public schools. Anthony Moore, who's a colleague, and I consider him to be one of our most thoughtful freshmen. So, doing the work, trying to understand how best to represent the people of his district, reading bills, has informed opinions when he stands up to speak. So he's not just some goofball. And that's probably, I shouldn't use the term goofball about any of my colleagues, but, but so I ran a bill 2 years ago that would advance the top two candidates all the way to the general election. So,
Jungle primary is what it is, is what they call it. Yeah.
So you're still allowed to have independent party primaries, right?
Yeah.
But in a situation where you only have a single party involved in a race, the top two vote getters in their primary advance to the general election where everybody gets to decide. So the idea there is it eliminates some of the extremism, because in the end they have to appeal to all the voters instead of just appealing to the base. Well, Anthony voted against my bill when it was in the elections committee, and I spoke to him afterwards. Didn't know from Adam at the time because he's a brand new freshman. I said, dude, why'd you vote against this? And he said, are you kidding? Why would I want to have two elections when I can have one? Well, those words came back to bite him this time around, because he had a well-financed, he was running against a millionaire who was an extremist on the far right, and also had, $300,000 of independent campaign money put into that race against him because he's a very strong believer in public schools. He serves on the Clinton Public Schools Foundation, for instance. And so he got targeted and at one point was losing pretty badly in the polling to this other person. And variety of reasons he was able to pull things out. But that race would not have gone to the general. It was decided right there in the primary. And so he couldn't get any help from any moderates in the Democrat side of things. But what should have happened, and I'm going to remind him of this when we talk the next time, is that under my bill, he and his opponent would have gone all the way to the general election, and I guarantee he would have beaten that person, regardless of the amount of money. Because people in his district, generally speaking, there's a lot of moderates out there.
What district is this?
This is Weatherford area.
Okay.
So
Clinton. Yeah, because you said Clinton. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. Yeah.
They're salt of the earth people who.
So SWASU is.
Yes.
SWASU's in this district. Yeah.
Yeah. And but in a closed primary, the way we have them today, all of your zealots in your party get out there and screw things up for the rest of the people.
Yeah, and the idea of coalition building doesn't become a factor anymore, or to the extent that it is a factor, it's a very either minoritarian coalition or it's a very, I mean, I guess it could be, this can overlap, extreme coalition that isn't representative of the majority of people in the district or in the
Yep.
state or anything of that nature, because that's why you have so many people, not so many, but I know a lot of people who registered as Republicans so they could vote in certain races like the state superintendent race and stuff like that, simply because they don't want they want to be able to have a say, and they wouldn't be able to have a say in who possibly wins or who the nominee is or whatnot if they're not registered within that party primary. So, or
They
don't
don't.
have a chance to vote for someone. Yeah, go
Yeah,
ahead. Sorry.
they don't want to be abused by a coalition of extremists, a coalition of zealots, and that's where we are today. And when I proposed this language a couple years ago, I had a senior member on the other side of the aisle who asked me what I was considering running as far as legislation, and I described that one to him, and he thought about it and he said, "Nah, I can't get on board with that. I'd never win another election." And I thought to myself, that's exactly why we need this bill. You know that the people in your district don't support you, but it doesn't matter to you because you can get a coalition of zealots, a coalition of extremists to show up and co-opt the primary process, and you win. And that's a bad place for us to be in a representative democracy.
Yeah, and there's also some people who I'm sure would want to support something like that, but they don't want to be on record supporting something like that because they know they would they have to play to that base of people in order to keep a primary from opponent from happening and stuff like that.
Yep.
So yeah.
And I heard, the other argument I heard about that bill was, well, the other party didn't run anybody, and so that's their own fault. Well, I point to my freshman year. I was first elected. We had a guy who was running against Todd Russ. Todd's an entrenched, well liked uh, uh, official in his own district,
Yeah.
and so this person had zero chance, effectively zero chance of beating him.
Because it was a
Well
young guy
financed.
too, I think, right? I think I
Well,
remember this race.
Dennis
Maybe.
Duggar.
Okay. Oh no, that was different races. What I'm thinking of, but yeah, I
Yeah,
remember.
you're
What
thinking of
talking
maybe
about,
of
yeah.
Kyle Mraz
No.
running again. No, well,
Another
anyway,
race, probably different seat, probably. But yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
the thing because you're a candidate is in the end these things are beauty contests, or popularity. That's probably a better way to say it. Popularity contest, right? And so it there is a real sense of rejection for anybody who loses an election because the people didn't want me for whatever reason. Well, in Dennis's case, even though he's running against this person that was damn near, it would have been very difficult to beat. He just couldn't come to terms with that. And 6 months later, he committed suicide. Why in the world would I put up some straw man candidate just so I can say my party's got somebody out? You have to have the fire in your belly to put yourself through this, to put your family through this, to take the kinds of heat and the awful conversations that sometimes happen at the door, the hate mail that comes out, the emails that people send you, and all of that stuff. Yeah, the robocalls that come against you, sometimes even from members of your own party, which happened to me in my race. Um, you don't wish that on anybody just so we can have somebody in the race. So I don't buy that argument at all. I completely reject it.
Well, this has been a really good conversation. Um, thank you so much for coming on. Where can we find you on social media and campaign website, I guess, maybe, or just any way to contact you if they want to talk with you about anything that's happening in the legislature?
Well, let's start with the easy ones. My email at the Capitol is andy.fugate@okhouse.gov. But you can find me on the socials at afugate, which is my Twitter handle. On Facebook, it's Fugate, the number 4, HD94. And then my campaign website is www.andyfugate.com.